Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter of my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story, and I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who have written such complimentary comments below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of my life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994.
The day of the wedding dawned to thick mist and a cool drizzle. "Just look at the bloody weather!" my mother stormed through the house. "The lawns are going to be a sodden mess. I'll never get them back to looking good again." The Rawdon's Hotel caterers had already set up the tables for the buffet lunch in our big double garage. The enormous marquee was up on the lawn, and hundreds of bottles of French champagne were cooling in ice in the big galvanized zinc tubs that we usually bathed the dogs in. All this activity had churned up the road to the back of the house and sheds to a muddy mire. The front drive was out of bounds to everybody but the wedding guest car, and all the guests had to take the district road past the bottom paddock, park in a field near the pigsty on the other side of the gum trees, and then somehow pick their way through long, thigh-high, wet kikuyu grass and up the slick, muddy track that led to the bottom gate next to the tennis court. As the bride, I was surplus to requirements, and I sat in my place halfway down our long, polished stinkwood dining table, wearing denim jeans, a t-shirt, and with bare feet, nibbling at a slice of toast spread with bovril, warily watching Mum as she rampaged around, raging at everyone and everything, including the weather. Somehow, I felt that there should be more to this, more than this, to my wedding day. It was supposed to be the happiest day in a girl's life. This was turning out to be as normal a morning as was possible when my mother had a big project on. I don't know why I'd expected things to be any different, or what I imagined would change. But somewhere in the back of my mind was a romantic notion that a mother had some kind of close relationship with her daughter, especially on the morning of her wedding. Perhaps I'd read about cozy, intimate chats as mothers brought their beloved daughters dainty little trays of breakfast in bed before helping their girls into their wedding finery. Maybe I'd read in novels or seen scenes in movies where there were emotional embraces and perhaps a tear or two shed at the fact that her little girl was getting married. The expression losing a daughter but gaining a son-in-law flashed through my mind. This morning's atmosphere had more of the feel of triumphantly getting rid of another daughter, flavour to it. I looked down the table to where my father was sitting at his usual place at the head down, stolidly eating his bacon and eggs, and wisely appearing oblivious to any potential mayhem that simmered as my mother dashed by, muttering ominously, lists flapping in her hand. It felt as if there was an unexploded bomb lying somewhere in the close vicinity. I caught his eye and he just rolled them upwards and shrugged briefly before resuming his breakfast. No affectionate father-daughter communication or sentimental reminiscences would be coming from him then. Why was I surprised? In any conversations and discussions in our family, the subject, and certainly the word love, never came up. When Fred and I had announced our engagement, neither my mother nor my father had drawn me aside to talk about the momentous decision we'd made, how happy or well suited we were, for that matter, was apparently of no consequence. From that moment on, all conversation was of a practical nature, and wedding plans went briskly ahead. I felt strangely cheated and a little disappointed, as if I'd missed something crucially important in my life. But since our parents and we had never properly connected, even on the most basic matters, it was hardly surprising that there would be no warm, personal relationship talk today. My mother's talk to me on the facts of life had been a curt, sex is for marriage and marriage alone. On Diana's wedding day, more of a sinister warning really to both of us, as I helped Diana get ready, pulling up the zip of her wedding dress, second-hand wedding dress, with a stain down the front. We'd exchanged the briefest of cautious glances, my sister and I, and that was all. All my sex education, sketchy enough as it was, had been gleaned. Most of it, if not all, turned out to be inaccurate, from whispered conversations and rumours among my school friends at St. Anne's. The factual side had been rather brutally dealt with by Julian on the beach in Aldeburgh, and then long after that, gently and tenderly by Fred. So, unbeknown to Mum, I wasn't in for any nasty surprises there. My sisters arrived straight after breakfast. They'd had a 6 a.m. start, having driven up separately from Durban, as Nicolette and Robin had their 2 little boys with them, and Mum immediately turned Nicolette around without so much as a cup of coffee after her 2-hour drive up from Durban with 2 very small, restless boys, and ordered the 3 of us to drive straight away into Nottingham Road to the hairdresser there to have our hair done and headpieces pinned into place. This didn't put my oldest sister into any better mood than the vile and bitter one she'd exhibited through the long 3 months of Mum's planning. Mum was going to follow in the big old black Pontiac with the dresses, and Dad had opted to take his Land Rover by himself with Ngiti, our Nduna, who was to be chauffeur, and who had driven both my other sisters to their weddings. Sitting crouched in the back, getting soaked in the persistent drizzle, although his neatly laundered white uniform coat and smart chauffeur's cap travelled in the cab so that they would remain dry. Dad would make his way straight to the Notties Hotel bar for a stiff gin, I suspected. The hair salon was attached to the hotel. This is the Nottingham Road Hotel. And Mum had booked a room for us in the main building to get changed and ready in. We three sisters were crawling along with Nicolette at the wheel of her old Minnie, slipping and sliding, sometimes axle deep, in the slick red mud. It was a vehicle hopelessly inadequate for our roads, but both she and I owned one. We'd had to get used to being bogged down in mire, or completely stranded in the middle of some of the deeper puddles. Hippo wallows, more like, as water had gotten to the distributor yet again. She had to accelerate to its rather feeble full speed to get up the second to last hill before the village, as it's quite steep. As she put her foot down, the car spun completely round once and then twice, and we veered backwards, out of control, towards a looming earth bank. Nicolette wrestled frantically with the steering wheel, while we skated sideways to end up finally, mercifully, resting against the soft earth bank with a gentle bump, but facing towards Nottingham Road. Crikey, well driven, was all I could gasp. Let's hope we're not stuck. And luckily we weren't, or we'd have been covered in mud before the wedding even started. After our hair was done, we went into Nottie's hotel from the hairdresser, to change into our wedding finery. As I scurried over the lawn to the room Mum had reserved, in the drizzle, still in jeans, t-shirt and mud-caked gumboots, wrestled off Mum, who wanted to wear them herself, but finally winning, as I didn't own a pair, and as the bride, I was supposed it wouldn't have looked good if I'd walked up the aisle with muddy feet. I was trying to keep my hair, veil and headdress dry as I stumbled along, head down, to keep the rain from washing my mascara off. I bumped straight into a large posse of my parents' friends who'd arrived early from Durban, all dressed very smartly for the occasion, to take advantage of a cup of tea or something a bit stronger in the warm hotel sitting room after their long drive. They all laughed uproariously at me, pointing, and called out mocking remarks like, "Is that the bride running away?" Or, "Are you bolting from your own wedding?" They cackled loudly at their own jokes, drawing the attention of the other hotel clientele, all complete strangers, to how ridiculous I looked. But I was so mortified and embarrassed that I kept my head down and carried on running as fast as was possible, handicapped by ill-fitting gumboots weighed down with a 2-inch coating of mud. It was so undignified to be caught like this. Ngiti was on standby in the car park, sitting proudly at the steering wheel of our big, now very muddy car, wearing his spotless chauffeur's outfit. Somebody had tied a white satin ribbon to the bonnet, and he was grinning from ear to ear, displaying what was left of the appalling stumps that passed for teeth, and visibly honoured to be playing such an important role in my day. My father was sitting in the back seat in his grey morning suit, top hat and grey gloves on his lap, red-faced and furious. I've had to put Mateus and the tractor on standby to pull out all the cars that are going to get stuck. The road's a bloody mess. I climbed into the back in my wedding dress, next to where Dad was seated. Ngiti helped me with my long lace veil as I tried to step clear of the thick layer of red mud that had accumulated on the doorsill. He'd borrowed a bucket of water from the hotel staff and made his best attempt at getting some of the worst splats of red mud off the most visible parts, like the windscreen. And we set off, driving slowly to the Notting Road Church, half a mile away on the other side of the village. Because it was Saturday, there were Zulus everywhere in the village doing their weekly payday shopping. Makoti, which means bride, shouted the women, jumping up and down and pointing at us in excitement as we passed them on the roadside. Makoti, repeated Ngiti, laughing with utter delight. Oh, Nkosazana, bayajabula. Everybody's happy for you. I glanced at Dad, who continued to stare stony-faced ahead of him. He said nothing. We climbed out of the car at the small church, where my bridesmaids were waiting, huddled out of the rain in the shelter of the tiny porch, and wordlessly my father offered his right arm to lead me in. Halfway up the aisle, I was pulled to an abrupt halt by my head. I couldn't move and had to stand stock still while Dad tugged at my arm in puzzlement. I removed my arm cautiously from his, took a step back and slowly and very carefully turned my head to look. I found my long lace-edged veil, which Nicolette was supposed to be carrying along behind me, had been left to trail along on the floor and had now snagged on a nail sticking out at floor level from one of the wooden pews. I was caught fast, and my so-called bridesmaids were walking so far behind me, looking at each other in self-conscious embarrassment that they hadn't even noticed. Eventually, Bar, who was standing in the nearest pew to the offending nail, stepped sideways into the aisle and stuck a sharp elbow into Nicolette's ribs, hissing at her to unhook the veil. And I was able to proceed, unhindered, up to the altar, to my trembling groom, who was almost paralyzed with wedding nerves. That's it for this week. More about the wedding next week. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't describe my parents better than this. I'm speechless. So thank you for listening, and it's goodbye from me. And I want to thank John Moslane, my sound engineer, for making these broadcasts possible. And I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.